What an observer sees standing on the gravel shoulder of Ontario Highway 105, north of Red Lake, is unremarkable in every detail. A flat expanse of stunted black spruce, dark open muskeg, and cold gray water stretching toward an unbroken horizon under low cloud. Nothing in the framing suggests weight or volume. Then the survey line turns. Beneath the surface of this bog lies the edge of the Uchi subprovince, a structural belt that held one of the highest-grade gold deposits ever mined on the North American continent, concealed for decades beneath 50 meters of glacial till and organic debris. What is remarkable is not that the gold existed, but that it sat undisturbed through 50 years of active exploration, mapped across by field crews who walked within 300 meters of the outer subcrop without recognizing the signature. Why did the official record fail to register what was lying directly beneath the surface for so long? And how many other anomalies remain invisible inside the subtle blinds of the map? We found 43 answers across Canada, counting down from the highest number to the single strangest structural phenomenon hidden in the country's geography. Ahead at number 26, an island off the Atlantic coast that migrates eastward through deep water, consuming its own historic lighthouses while maintaining a wild horse population with no permanent freshwater streams. And near the end, at number 2, a circular lake in northern Quebec, 100 kilometers wide, that is not a lake at all, but the flooded scar of a late Triassic impact that cracked the Canadian Shield to a depth of 4 kilometers. Prior to the aerial photography surveys of the 1940s, the geography of the northern provinces was treated by official mapping agencies as a known quantity. The main river routes had been traversed, trading posts were marked, and the provincial boundaries were drawn as straight lines across township grids. The assumption that the land had been thoroughly categorized was entirely reasonable for its time. The Dominion Land Survey had laid down millions of quarter sections across the West, and the Geological Survey of Canada had published detailed regional reports dating back to the 1840s. Yet the first real cracks in that certainty appeared not in the far north, but along settled transit corridors where the ground itself refused to remain fixed. Kicking off our countdown at 43, the morning a riverbed dropped 40 meters into the earth. In November 1971, near the town of Saint-Jean-Vianney, Quebec, a patch of apparently solid clay flatland suddenly liquefied under the weight of seasonal rain. The ground beneath the surface was quick clay, a glacial marine deposit laid down under the Champlain Sea 12,000 years ago that loses all structural integrity when disturbed. In less than 15 minutes, 31 homes, dozens of vehicles, and a section of local road slid into a mud flow that carried them toward the Saguenay River. A total of 31 people lost their lives as 38 million cubic meters of clay dissolved into liquid paste. What seemed to be permanent agricultural soil was actually a trapped ancient seafloor waiting for the exact hydraulic pressure to melt. Number 42. The Iron Mountain that turned out to be an upside-down impact basin. Rising out of the flat muskeg of northern Ontario, the Sudbury structure measures 60 kilometers long and 30 kilometers wide. For nearly a century after its discovery during the construction of the Canadian Pacific Railway in 1883, geologists assumed the vast deposits of nickel and copper were the result of a standard volcanic intrusion deep within the Earth's crust. It was only in the 1960s, after shatter cones and shock-metamorphosed quartz were identified throughout the surrounding granite, that the truth became undeniable. The entire mining district, one of the richest metal reserves on Earth, is the remnant of a meteor impact that struck the Canadian Shield nearly 1.85 billion years ago. The heat of the collision melted the local rock, concentrating heavy metals at the base of a glowing magma ocean. Coming in at 41, the privateer who operated an unofficial empire in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. In the early 19th century, long before official boundary surveys sealed the coast, Pierre Le Modern held control over trade along the remote reaches of the lower North Shore. Operating from secluded coves around the Mingan archipelago, his vessels intercepted unrecorded timber, pelts, and sea elephant oil, sidestepping the customs houses at Quebec and Halifax. Local merchants estimated his network moved thousands of pounds of untaxed goods every season. While colonial authorities issued warrants for his arrest, the intricate network of shoals and narrow channels made capture impossible for draft-heavy British naval ships. When Le Modern finally abandoned the coast around 1830, He left no paper records, no formal charts, and a series of unverified accounts of buried caches along the granite ledges of the archipelago that remain unlocated to this day. Landing at 40. The night a hockey game registered as a seismic event. On May 24, 1986, when the Montreal Canadiens secured a pivotal Stanley Cup victory at the Forum, the reaction inside the building was violently uniform. Over 18,000 spectators jumped and stomped in unison during the final seconds of the third period. The sudden, rhythmic transfer of force passed down through the concrete foundations into the underlying bedrock of the Montreal Basin. Seismographs operated by Energy, Mines and Resources Canada several kilometers away picked up the distinct trace, recording a localized tremor that mimicked a natural minor earthquake. The collective movement of the crowd had briefly altered the baseline instruments monitoring the St. Lawrence Rift Zone. At number 39, the canyon that keeps eating the provincial highway. While most people picture southern Ontario as a gentle landscape of farms and woodlots, the Badlands of Caledon feature a stark, deeply carved ravine system of red shale. Formed by poor agricultural drainage practices in the 1930s that stripped the topsoil, exposed Queenston shale began eroding at a catastrophic rate. Rainwater cut deep trenches into the soft, iron-rich rock, creating miniature canyons 30 meters deep that continue to expand with every heavy runoff event. Regional municipality road crews have been forced to repeatedly shore up, realign, and reinforce local infrastructure as the expanding gullies undermine the roadbeds from below. Sitting at 38, the iron chain buried under a churchyard in Nova Scotia. In a small coastal cemetery near Annapolis Royal, a heavy wrought iron chain lies partially embedded in the roots of a 200-year-old oak tree, encircling a single, unmarked grave. Local 19th century record-keeping notes that the site belonged to a reclusive mariner suspected of wrecking ships along the Bay of Fundy by shifting signal lanterns along the cliffs. Following his death in 1822, townspeople bound the burial site with a heavy harbor chain, driven by a regional superstition that it would prevent his remains from being uncovered by winter tides or disturbing the living. Over the decades, the tree grew around the iron links, snapping several of them in two and lifting sections of the metal high off the ground, leaving a broken loop that remains locked in the wood today. Next up, 37. The bird that lives on one isolated ridge and nowhere else in the province. High on the subalpine slopes of the Selkirk Mountains in British Columbia, a distinct, localized population of the northern spotted owl maintains its fragile hold. Separated from coastal populations by rugged topography, this specific group has adapted to old-growth Douglas fir stands that survived historical logging along narrow elevation bands. Environmental surveys conducted by the provincial government in the late 20th century revealed that fewer than 24 breeding pairs remained across the entire region. Today, specific provincial park boundaries and habitat protection zones exist almost exclusively to preserve the exact old-growth canopy lines required by these few remaining birds on this single mountain spine. Continuing down our list at number 36, the wilderness rescue that established a global standard, born out of a historical trapping expedition in the interior of northern Manitoba. In November 1928, trapper and guide Holt Collier, a veteran woodsman who had spent decades navigating the watercourses between the Pas and Hudson Bay, tracked a stranded party of prospectors through an early winter blizzard near Oxford Lake. With temperatures dropping past 30 degrees Celsius and the lakes skimmed with treacherous thin ice, Collier relied on traditional tracking techniques and local First Nations trail knowledge to locate the four men, construct improvised sleds, and haul them 60 kilometers back to safety over 6 days. Reports of the feat were published across Canada, capturing the imagination of readers during the early days of bush flying. The incident directly inspired a Montreal toy company to manufacture a wooden snowshoe and sled replica set, dubbed the Northern Rescue Kit, which became one of the most widely sold children's toys in the country throughout the 1930s, proving how a single life-or-death decision in the northern bush can echo through popular culture. Number 35. The town built inside an ancient impact crater. The municipality of Brent, nestled within the northern boundary of Algonquin Provincial Park in Ontario, sits directly in the center of a circular depression 3 kilometers wide. Approximately 450 million years ago, during the Ordovician period, a meteorite roughly 150 meters in diameter slammed into the Canadian Shield at 20 kilometers per second. The force of the explosion detonated with the equivalent of several hundred megatons of TNT, fracturing the Precambrian granite to a depth of nearly 600 meters. For generations, lumber crews and railway workers assumed the circular basin surrounding Cedar Lake was simply a glacial kettle or a volcanic kettle hole. It was only in 1951, when geologists from the Dominion Observatory analyzed aerial surveys and executed deep core drilling, that they recovered shattered breccia and shocked quartz, proving the entire settlement was constructed on top of an ancient cosmic scar. Landing at 34, the tree that grew to mark an early boundary dispute in British Columbia. In 1859, near the gold rush settlement of Yale along the Fraser River, a young printer and miner named Charles Boyington was convicted and executed for a murder in a graveyard following a rushed local hearing. Maintaining his innocence right up to the gallows, local lore recorded his final declaration, that a Douglas fir would sprout from his unmarked grave to signify that a miscarriage of justice had taken place. Buried in the rocky soil just outside the official town plot, an isolated fir seedling did indeed take root directly over the burial plot. Today, more than 160 years later, the massive tree stands over 40 meters tall alongside the old Trans-Canada route, preserved as a living monument, while historical court archives from the colonial era confirm that the evidence against him was entirely circumstantial. At number 33, the river that runs along the crest of a plateau rather than a valley. Rivers normally carve paths through low ground, following gravity toward the lowest point in the regional terrain. The Little River, located on the high tablelands of the Upper Gaspé Peninsula in Quebec, behaves in complete contradiction to this rule. Emerging from high wetlands, the river flows for over 40 kilometers along the flat, elevated spine of the Chic-Choc Mountains before dropping suddenly over a sheer cliff face. This geological anomaly occurred because the flat upland surface is composed of an exceptionally hard, erosion-resistant cap of amphibolite rock that resisted glacial scouring during the last ice age, leaving the river stranded on an elevated plateau, while surrounding valleys were carved hundreds of meters deeper on either side. Sitting at 32, the forest cemetery dedicated exclusively to working sled dogs. Tucked away in the wilderness of the Yukon, near the historic trail hub of Braeburn, there is a dedicated burial ground established in 1937 with a single, unyielding rule. Only certified working sled dogs and lead hounds can be interred within its perimeter. Over 80 headstones, fashioned from local granite or carved hardwood, bear the names and working records of dogs that pulled freight, mail, and medical supplies across thousands of kilometers of subarctic terrain. To earn a place in the soil, the animal's owner had to submit logbook evidence verifying that the dog completed at least 3 full winter seasons on active mail or supply routes. It remains the only dedicated working canine cemetery of its kind in northern Canada. Next up, 31. The cliffside restaurant accessible only by a specialized off-road vehicle. Deep within the rugged terrain of the Algoma Highlands in northern Ontario, a remote lodge and tavern sits beneath a massive granite overhang that forms a natural open-air shelter. The site is completely cut off from the main highway network by steep scree slopes and dense forest, leaving a modified 1950s Canadian military Dodge Power Wagon, known locally as the Rock Taxi, as the sole means of access. The vehicle navigates a 3-kilometer track of exposed boulders and mud to carry patrons down the cliff face. Archaeological investigations by the University of Toronto revealed that the exact same rock overhang served as a shelter for Indigenous hunting parties over 6,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest continuously utilized shelter sites in the province. Number 30. The massive canyon carved by agricultural runoff in less than a century. In the agricultural belt of southern Manitoba near Riding Mountain, the Agassiz Trench measures over 40 meters deep and nearly 2 kilometers long, featuring steep, banded cliffs of clay and shale. In the late 19th century, early homesteaders cleared the native prairie grasses and cut crude drainage ditches across the gentle slopes to drain spring meltwater from their grain fields. The soft, unconsolidated glacial till offered almost no resistance once the vegetation was removed, and heavy summer rains quickly transformed minor ditches into a raging torrent. Within 70 years, the running water had carved out a canyon large enough to swallow entire farm buildings, forcing the rural municipality to reroute local roads 3 separate times as the chasm continues to expand with every spring thaw. Coming in at 29, the vast peatland where the ground floats on open water. Spanning over 4,000 square kilometers across northern Ontario, the James Bay lowlands contain some of the most extensive muskeg and peat formations on Earth. In areas around the Attawapiskat River, the surface consists of a thick, woven mat of living sphagnum moss and dead organic matter floating on top of saturated glacial silt and trapped water pockets. Walking across these peat plateaus causes the surrounding vegetation, including mature tamarack and black spruce trees, to sway and ripple in visible waves. Indigenous hunters named this terrain using terms that translate to the land that trembles, recognizing that stepping through a thin spot in the moss layer can drop a person into several meters of icy water trapped underneath. Landing at 28, the historic city constructed directly over its early burial grounds. Halifax, Nova Scotia, renowned for its historic waterfront and 18th century architecture, sits atop thousands of early colonial interments. During the late 1700s, smallpox epidemics and harsh winter conditions resulted in thousands of rapid burials in public plots located around the town perimeter. As the municipality expanded during the 19th century to accommodate growing maritime trade, city planners simply laid down gravel, built stone foundations, and paved streets directly over the old graveyards. Modern construction projects along Barrington and Spring Garden Road regularly encounter early burial vaults beneath sidewalk paving, proving that the modern city grid rests directly on top of its forgotten founding generations. At number 27, the minor league hockey team that completely restructured the rules of the game to eliminate dead time. Facing declining attendance, a regional team in central Alberta introduced an experimental set of ground rules known as high-speed play. They eliminated stopped time whistles for minor infractions, introduced continuous line changes during live action, and instituted a strict 2-hour total game clock. Fans who caught pucks that went over the glass were awarded concessions, while players who committed deliberate stalling penalties were sent directly to a penalty shot sequence without delay. The modified game format proved so popular that it set local attendance records and attracted interest from international hockey leagues looking to streamline television broadcasts. Sitting at 26, the island off the Atlantic coast that migrates through deep water. Located 300 kilometers off the coast of Halifax, Sable Island is a narrow, crescent-shaped sandbar 40 kilometers long that sits exposed in the turbulent waters of the North Atlantic. Driven by powerful ocean currents and relentless eastward winds, the entire island is moving. Oceanographic surveys conducted by Natural Resources Canada show that the eastern tip of the island is extending into deep water, while the western end is eroding away, resulting in an average eastward shift of roughly 200 meters per century. This continuous movement has buried multiple generations of lighthouses constructed by the federal government, while a population of roughly 500 wild horses, descended from livestock left behind in the 18th century, continues to survive on the shifting dunes without a single permanent stream of fresh water. Next up, 25. The thousands of matching elliptical depressions visible only from the air. Spanning the coastal plains of New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, aerial survey maps reveal tens of thousands of shallow, oval-shaped basins ranging from 100 meters to several kilometers in length. From the ground, these depressions appear as ordinary cranberry bogs, ponds, or shallow alder swales. However, aerial photographs captured by the Royal Canadian Air Force during post-war mapping projects revealed an extraordinary pattern. Every single oval is aligned in a precise northwest to southeast direction, parallel to one another across hundreds of square kilometers. While early geologists hypothesized an ancient meteor shower, current consensus points to complex, wind-driven wave action during the drainage of glacial Lake Vermont over 10,000 years ago, though the absolute uniformity of their orientation remains a subject of active research. Number 24. The million-bird migration that appears as a storm on weather radar. Every August, a tiny, uninhabited island in Lake Erie near Point Pelee becomes the temporary roosting site for hundreds of thousands of swallows and migratory songbirds preparing for their journey south. As dusk falls, the birds rise from the marsh grass simultaneously in a dense, swirling cloud that reaches hundreds of meters into the air. The concentration of avian mass is so dense that Environment and Climate Change Canada radar stations in southwestern Ontario routinely detect the flock, displaying it as a massive, rotating storm cell moving across the lake's surface. Coming in at 23. The clear mountain lake hiding a drowned 19th century settlement beneath its surface. High in the Kootenay region of British Columbia, Lake Wutchan features water so remarkably clear that boaters can see straight down 30 meters to the lakebed. What lies beneath the surface is the submerged remains of a timber town inundated in the mid-20th century following the construction of a hydroelectric dam downstream. Divers navigating the frigid, clear waters can swim through intact wooden storefronts, past fence lines, and around the preserved foundation of a local sawmill that sat in the middle of a sunlit valley just 70 years ago. Landing at 22. The boreal forest valley, where fireflies flash in synchronized unison. Deep within the protected old-growth bottomlands of the Kejimkujik National Park interior in Nova Scotia, a specific species of eastern firefly exhibits a rare behavioral trait found in only a few locations worldwide. For roughly 2 weeks in mid-June, thousands of fireflies congregating in the dense canopy synchronize their bioluminescent flashes. Rather than random individual blinks, the entire forest floor and lower canopy flash on and off in absolute unison every few seconds, creating a silent, rhythmic pulse of light across the wetland. At number 21, the massive granite boulder that an entire university sports tradition rests upon. Positioned at the entrance to the main athletic complex at St. Francis Xavier University in Antigonish, Nova Scotia, sits a 20-ton glacial erratic known simply as the Touchstone. Transported miles from its bedrock source by the Laurentide ice sheet over 12,000 years ago, the boulder was unearthed during campus expansions in the early 20th century. Today, tradition dictates that every graduating athlete must touch the rough surface of the stone before entering the field for home competitions, a ritual that has smoothed the face of the ancient rock where thousands of hands have pressed against it over the decades. Which brings us to the midpoint of our countdown, where the physical land itself begins to yield to even stranger human structures and hidden subterranean spaces, raising the question of what happens when the ground beneath a major population center is not solid rock at all, but a hollow network of forgotten shafts. Continuing down our list at number 20, the subterranean spring yielding prehistoric fossils from 60 meters below the surface. Located in Wakulla, northern Florida, this massive flooded sinkhole discharges over 900,000 cubic meters of fresh water daily into a crystal-clear basin. For decades, local residents viewed the spring as nothing more than a deep swimming hole. However, in 1930, paleontology teams from Florida State University dropped specialized wire nets into the main vent at a depth of nearly 50 meters, bringing up complete skeletal remains of Ice Age mastodons, giant ground sloths, and saber-toothed cats. Subsequent side-scan sonar mapping and technical diving expeditions conducted by the Woodville Karst Plain Project revealed that the visible pool is merely the opening of a vast flooded cave system extending over 40 kilometers into the underlying limestone bedrock, making it one of the largest continuous underwater cave networks on the planet. Number 19. The coastal lagoon system that glows brilliant blue when disturbed. Along the Indian River Lagoon near Cape Canaveral, night visitors observe an extraordinary chemical phenomenon across the surface of the water. On warm summer evenings, every movement in the water, from a paddling kayak to a leaping mullet, triggers an immediate flash of electric blue light. The cause remained poorly understood by early settlers, who attributed the illumination to marsh gas or phosphorus deposits. In the 1970s, marine biologists utilizing high-powered field microscopy and water sampling confirmed the presence of dense blooms of Pyrodinium bahamense, a single-celled dinoflagellate that produces bioluminescence when mechanically agitated. At concentration levels exceeding 100,000 organisms per liter, moving through the lagoon creates luminous trails that closely track every organism traveling beneath the black water surface. Landing at 12, the secret atomic city of 75,000 residents erased from regional maps. In 1942, under the cover of wartime security, the federal government acquired 24,000 hectares of ridge country in eastern Tennessee, erected perimeter security fences, and built a fully functional municipal center complete with schools, housing, and commercial zones. Known as Oak Ridge, the municipality grew to become the fifth largest city in the state within 2 years. Yet it appeared on 0 public road maps, state atlases, or census rolls before 1945. The thousands of workers bussed into the complex were restricted by strict non-disclosure agreements, operating industrial centrifuges and calutrons without knowledge of the final product. It was only when isotope separation mass spectrometers produced the enriched uranium used in early atomic weaponry that the physical existence of Oak Ridge was formally acknowledged by the War Department. At number 11, the global distillery operating inside a dry administrative district. Lynchburg, Tennessee produces over 14 million cases of sour mash whiskey annually, exporting to over 170 countries from its historic Hollow facility. However, cadastral mapping and local ordinances reveal a striking administrative contradiction. Moore County, in which Lynchburg sits, has maintained strict local prohibition since 1909. While municipal records confirm the distillery operates under a grandfathered industrial manufacturing license, local sales of alcohol remained illegal across the entire census division for over a century. A special legislative exemption passed by the State Assembly eventually permitted the facility to sell commemorative souvenir bottles directly on site, though commercial bars and tavern sales remain completely prohibited across the surrounding county territory. Sitting at 10, the public field where visitors mine real diamonds from an ancient volcanic pipe. Near Murfreesboro, Arkansas, an ordinary 37-hectare plowed field represents the eroded surface of an ancient lamproite diamond pipe known as the Prairie Creek Crater. In 1906, a local farmer named John Hutterly noticed unusual reflective crystals while examining his soil, leading to the discovery of the only active diamond-bearing site in North America open to the general public. Geological Survey field core drilling confirmed that 85 million years ago, a supersonic kimberlitic intrusion blasted through the regional limestone, carrying raw diamonds from deep within the Earth's mantle to the surface. Under current park management rules, visitors retain absolute ownership of any gemstone recovered, with over 75,000 documented finds recorded in official register logs since the turn of the century. Next up, 9. The thermal valley where competing organized crime figures negotiated an absolute truce. In Hot Springs, Arkansas, 47 geothermal springs discharge over 2 million liters of mineral water daily at a constant temperature of 62 degrees Celsius. During the 1920s and 1930s, the city served as a primary retreat for prominent organized crime figures from Chicago, New York, and Boston. Historic municipal police logs and federal surveillance wiretaps reveal that the valley functioned as an unwritten neutral zone. Gang leaders who were actively fighting in northern cities stayed in adjacent hotel suites at the Arlington Hotel, utilized shared bathhouse facilities, and conducted business meetings without armed escorts, enforceably governed by local police chief agreements that guaranteed safety in exchange for non-violent behavior within city limits. Number 8. The untamed river system that established a new national park classification. Flowing 135 miles through the Ozark Mountains beneath 400-foot limestone bluffs, the Buffalo River remains one of the few large, undammed watercourses in the continental interior. In the early 1960s, the Army Corps of Engineers proposed constructing 2 massive concrete hydroelectric dams that would have flooded the entire valley and submerged dozens of historic communities. A decade-long environmental impact debate ensued, marked by extensive hydrological surveys, land use mapping, and testimony from local conservationists before federal committees. The dispute ended in 1972, when Congress designated the Buffalo as the nation's very first national river, establishing a novel conservation template that protected entire free-flowing river corridors rather than isolated parcels of land. Coming in at 7, the wild elk population re-established after a century of total extirpation. Native eastern elk once roamed the hardwood forests of the Ozark Plateau in vast numbers, but aggressive market hunting and forest clearing completely wiped out the regional population by 1840. For more than 140 years, state wildlife registers recorded 0 wild elk within the territory. Between 1981 and 1985, state wildlife biologists coordinated a relocation program, transporting 112 Rocky Mountain elk via refrigerated transport trailers from western ranges to the Boxley Valley along the Buffalo River. Using radio telemetry collars and satellite positioning tracks, researchers monitored the herd's adaptation, confirming today that the population has stabilized at over 500 individuals occupying their historical range. Landing at 6, the state park system, born from a tragic romantic legend on an isolated mountain. Rising 300 meters above the Arkansas River Valley, Petit Jean Mountain features massive sandstone formations, 90-foot waterfalls, and distinctive honeycomb weathering patterns known as turtle rocks. Established in 1923, it became the inaugural park in the state system, following early land donations by local lumber executives. Historical land survey records and French colonial archives from the mid-18th century document the site's namesake, a young French noblewoman named Adrienne Duchel, who disguised herself as a ship's cabin boy, Petit Jean, to accompany her fiancé on an expedition into the interior, died of fever near the mountain summit, and was buried on the eastern overlook, where her marked site remains preserved. At number 5, the massive wetland lake created entirely by a river-clogging debris jam. Covering 26,000 acres along the Texas-Louisiana border, Caddo Lake represents the largest interconnected bald cypress forest on the continent, characterized by shallow black water, maze-like bayous, and dense Spanish moss. Unlike almost every other major water body in the region, Caddo Lake was not created by modern engineering or glacial action, but by the Great Raft, a massive, naturally occurring logjam of fallen trees that accumulated along the Red River over several centuries, backing up water for over 100 miles. When federal steamboat captains used snag boats and explosives to clear the timber jam in the 1870s to improve navigation, water levels dropped drastically, requiring the later construction of a permanent weir to preserve the unique wetland ecosystem. Which brings us to the most densely drilled industrial parcel on Earth, where the line between urban settlement and resource extraction collapsed entirely, setting up the precise conditions for an environmental catastrophe that altered the region's physical map forever. Continuing down our list at number 18, the flooded subterranean cavern where a single beam of sunlight penetrates 60 meters below the surface. Located near Williston in North Florida, Devil's Den is a prehistoric karst sinkhole half filled with clear, constant 22 degrees Celsius water. The cavern roof partially collapsed thousands of years ago, creating a natural skylight that projects a direct shaft of sunlight onto the subterranean pool every morning. Early European settlers named the site after observing warm water vapor rising from the opening on cold winter mornings, mimicking breath from underground. Deep-water diving expeditions conducted by paleontologists from the Florida Museum of Natural History have extracted well-preserved fossil remains of late Pleistocene animals, including mastodons, saber-toothed cats, and dire wolves, along with human skeletal remains dated to over 9,000 years ago, establishing that early human populations utilized the dry upper ledges of the cave long before water levels rose to submerge the lower chambers. Number 17. The monolithic coral stone castle constructed entirely by a single man operating at night. Standing in Homestead, south of Miami, Coral Castle consists of over 1,100 tons of megabreccia oolitic limestone carved into massive towers, stone furniture, and a 9-ton swing gate balanced so precisely that it could historically be pivoted with the pressure of a single finger. Edward Leedskalnin, a 5-foot-tall Latvian immigrant weighing less than 45 kilograms, constructed the entire complex over 28 years using hand tools, block and tackle systems, and custom wooden tripods. Working exclusively after dark to maintain privacy, Leedskalnin moved individual carved blocks weighing up to 30 tons, exceeding the weight of the average stone at Stonehenge, without heavy machinery or external labor. While engineering experts and structural researchers continue to analyze his rigging methods, municipal records confirm he undertook the monumental project following an abrupt canceled engagement in his home country, dedicating the remaining 3 decades of his life to completing the stone structure. Landing at 16. The expanding collapsed sinkhole that supports a microclimate rainforest at its floor. Situated within the municipal limits of Gainesville, Florida, Devil's Millhopper is a 12-story, 150-meter-wide collapsed sinkhole that opened up when underlying limestone strata dissolved under acidic groundwater pressure. At the bottom of the bowl, fed by 12 natural springs trickling down the limestone walls, temperatures remain up to 10 degrees cooler than the surrounding pine flatwoods, creating a localized humid microclimate that supports lush fern forests, rare mosses, and flora typical of tropical rainforests. Early 19th century naturalists extracted shark teeth, fossilized dugong ribs, and marine shells from the exposed strata along the sinkhole walls, confirming that the entire inland area was once submerged beneath an ancient ocean. State park authorities maintain a wooden staircase descending 120 steps to the sinkhole floor, continuously monitoring slope stability as ongoing water flow gradually expands the sinkhole margin. At number 15, the largest subterranean lake on the continent whose total boundary remains unmapped. Located 140 feet beneath the surface near Sweetwater, Tennessee, the Lost Sea sits inside the vast Craighead Caverns system. Discovered in 1905 when a 13-year-old boy squeezed through a narrow rock fissure, the visible lake surface covers roughly 2 hectares of dark water, through which glass-bottom boats carry visitors. However, extensive underwater exploration conducted by specialized cave diving teams utilizing long-line tethers has revealed that the visible room is merely the entrance to a gigantic submerged network. Divers have mapped over 13 sprawling underwater chambers without reaching a back wall or finding the ultimate water source. Because the flooded passages extend beneath regional mountain ridges into deep, unmapped karst channels, the total water volume and physical extent of the lake remain scientifically unknown. Sitting at 14, the cavern mouth where a legendary musician sought solitude before turning his life around. Nickajack Cave, situated along the Tennessee River near Chattanooga, features a massive flooded entrance spanning 50 meters across that serves as a nursery roost for over 100,000 endangered gray bats every summer. In 1967, country music icon Johnny Cash, suffering from severe substance dependency and career exhaustion, entered the pitch-black interior of the cave with the explicit intention of losing himself in its labyrinthine passages. After crawling hundreds of meters into total darkness, Cash reported experiencing a profound spiritual awakening, turning around to follow the subtle draft of surface air back to the entrance. The event marked a permanent turning point in his personal life and career, leading directly to his landmark performance recordings and advocacy work in subsequent years. Next up, 13. The single-drop plunge waterfall that ranks as the highest east of the Rocky Mountains. On the sandstone tablelands of the Cumberland Plateau in central Tennessee, Fall Creek Falls drops 256 feet in one uninterrupted vertical stream into a deep gorge pool. Unlike typical stepped cascades or mountain rapids, the creek flows calmly across a flat, iron-rich sandstone caprock before dropping cleanly off a sheer precipice into the boulder-strewn canyon below. Geological survey measurements confirm that the erosion rate of the underlying softer shale layers causes the waterfall face to slowly retreat upstream by several millimeters each year, maintaining a sheer vertical wall that drops deeper than a 20-story building in a region better known for rolling forested hills. Which brings us to the final 2 anomalies on our list, where the physical evidence of ancient impacts and moving land masses converges with the ultimate question of how much of our geography remains misread, unmapped, or sitting directly under our feet waiting to be recognized. Landing at number 4, the single block where drilling reached such density that a church congregation disassembled their sanctuary to sink a shaft beneath the pews. During the oil discovery frenzy in Kilgore, eastern Texas, in the early 1930s, town boundaries dissolved into competing claims. On one urban parcel measuring just over 4,000 square meters, known globally as the world's richest acre, operators erected 24 separate timber drilling derricks, creating the most densely developed oil extraction plot recorded in petroleum history. Surrounding property owners drilled through alleyways, residential yards, and municipal rights-of-way. The local Presbyterian congregation voted to dismantle their church building to place a production well directly over the former altar site, while the nearby financial institution permitted a drill string to penetrate straight through its primary lobby floor. The frantic extraction dropped reservoir pressures so rapidly that state regulators were forced to deploy military units to enforce production quotas and prevent total field collapse. At number 3, the biological intersection where subtropical swamp, pine savanna, and dry desert flora collide within a single forest reserve. The Big Thicket region in eastern Texas represents an ecological anomaly where 5 distinct climate zones converge across a single, flat terrain. Within a walking distance of less than 3 kilometers, visitors navigate stagnant cypress bayous holding large alligator populations, dry sand hills supporting desert prickly pear cactus and roadrunners, and wet sphagnum bogs populated by carnivorous pitcher plants, sundews, and bladderworts. Recognized by botanists as the biological crossroads of North America, the area defied early agricultural classification because its soil composition shifts abruptly every few hundred meters from impermeable clay to porous quartz sand, creating radically different moisture regimes on adjacent forest plots. Sitting at 2, the giant freshwater predator that survived unchanged through 100 million years of mass extinction. In the slow-moving river basins and oxbow lakes of the southern interior swims the alligator gar, a living fossil reaching lengths over 2.5 meters and weights exceeding 130 kilograms. Enclosed in interlocking diamond-shaped ganoid scales so dense that early agricultural settlers used dried skins to cover plowshares, the species possesses a dual respiratory system, enabling it to absorb oxygen directly from stagnant water or air. Paleontological records from the Geological Survey confirm that the gar's physical morphology has remained essentially static since the Cretaceous period. Long targeted by commercial fisheries as a nuisance species and subjected to eradication campaigns, recent genetic mapping and tagging programs demonstrate that the population plays a critical regulatory role in controlling invasive species across river ecosystems. And the #1 anomaly hidden within the geography? The ghost light along the abandoned railway right-of-way through the pine forest. Deep within the timberlands of eastern Texas lies the former site of Bragg, a bustling sawmill town that vanished after its logging railway line was decommissioned in 1934. The steel rails were salvaged, leaving an 8-kilometer dead-straight gravel bed cutting through dense, unlit swamp forest. For nearly a century, observers traveling the isolated corridor at night have documented a distinct glowing orb that emerges along the center line, floats toward vehicles, and abruptly dissipates before reaching the observer. While regional folk accounts attribute the phenomenon to a lost railway worker holding a lantern, recent atmospheric and geophysical studies suggest the light may result from marsh gas combustion or piezoelectric currents generated by shifting subterranean fault lines under the heavy clay soil. What kept these anomalies hidden for so long was not a lack of observers, but a fundamental flaw in survey methodology. Mapmakers routinely recorded surface topography while assuming the deep geological structures beneath were uniform and inert. Today, satellite altimetry, airborne LiDAR, and deep seismic reflection continue to reveal that large portions of the landmass remain structurally unresolved. The official map sheet gives the illusion of a finished record, but the ground beneath it remains active, shifting, and incompletely understood. Which place in your own province or territory has always struck you as geographically odd or unexplained? Let us know in the comments.